All right, so let's look at how Herbert Hoover came to be president by winning the election of 1928. So Calvin Coolidge, Coolidge becomes president after Harding dies. He wins the election in 1924 in his own right, and then he declines to run in the 1928 presidential election. And so this is going to pave the way for Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover is known for being the person in charge of the Department of Commerce under both Harding and Coolidge. And so the Republicans are going to nominate Herbert Hoover, and the Democrats will nominate Al Smith from New York. So what do we need to know about these guys? Hoover, educated as a mine engineer, had become wealthy and successful, on his own merits before being appointed to Harding's cabinet. He had been brought up as a Quaker, and he supported a practice of business and government that he called associationalism. A term that might be translated, as individual initiative within a cooperative framework. He likes the government and the private sector to work together. He doesn't want the government, he wants to still stay true to that laissez-faire approach. He wants to encourage what he's going to deem to be rugged individualism. But he wants the private sector and the public sector to cooperate. This associationalism approach, it served him well in his business enterprises. When he served as head of the Food Administration for Belgian relief during World War One, and as Secretary of Commerce under the Harding and Coolidge. Something that was interesting to note about him is that he had never been elected to office. And he actually found this ever-present campaign mudslinging by those in both parties to be a painful experience. His opponent, Al Smith, had a couple things going against him. He's a Catholic. America, I don't think, it's apparent that they're just not ready for Catholicism yet, or for a Catholic president yet. He's a Tammany Hall Democrat from New York City, so he is, associated with that political machine, corruption, big city politics of Tammany Hall in New York. And he's a wet. That means he believes in ending prohibition. And another thing that is going against him is that I don't think the country, even though this noble experiment is giving rise to gangsterism and people like Al Capone, and it's not quite working the way people had envisioned it. The country is not quite ready to give up on this experiment of outlawing alcohol. And you put Al Smith being a wet, you put him being a Democrat from New York with Tammany Hall, and you have him being a Catholic. Many people feel that a person that isn't Protestant, a person that was born and bred in that urban environment, could not have either sympathy or understanding for those living in other circumstances. And so he just really doesn't have a chance. And we see that, when you put Hoover up against Smith, even though he's not a powerful speaker, his plain speech, his Midwestern accent, actually transmitted a sense of sincerity to Americans across the radio waves, while Smith's more flamboyant expressions and his New York City twang didn't come across as well. And so voters actually show their approval of conservative government, show their approval of this Republican dominance of the 1920s by voting in Hoover by a landslide. As well as installing, an overwhelmingly majority of Republicans in the Congress. And so this is the situation that Hoover's going to be entering the presidency with. You know, 9 by the time he's inaugurated, solid years. You know, of Republicans handling the government, and handling, if you want to say that, put that in air quotes, the economy with their laissez-faire approach, their pro-business approach. And so when prosperity, you know, when Hoover's getting elected, and he's running in 1928, he has no reason to think, and nobody really does have any real reason to think that this prosperity is going to end. And Hoover is actually, you know, credited with a quote by saying, "We have not yet reached this goal, but we shall soon, with the help of God, be in sight of the day when poverty shall be banished from this nation." He says this, but in reality, as he's entering office, and we talked about this in the previous video, there are many factors that are actually weakening the American economy. Here are them in the factors in a nutshell. Lack of diversification, uneven distribution of income, that gap between rich and poor, overproduction. Overproduction, you know, in the farm sector, overproduction with the consumer-made products. Older industries are in trouble. I don't spend too much time about this, but if you think about it, you know, those industries that we talked about in the late 19th century, like the railroad industry. Well, you know, with the rise of the automobile, something has to give, and unfortunately, it's going to be the railroad industry. The steel industry. You know, the steel industry, as car production is going to slow down, as building slows down, or you know, the production or the building of buildings. As that kind of slows down, you know, towards the end of the decade, they're going to take a hit. Coal, you know, as the train industry, you know, or the railroad industry becomes in trouble, coal's going to become, you know, in trouble as like, you know, petroleum and oil will take their place. Speculation, easy credit, buying on margin. Speculation dealing with that whole idea of get rich quick with a stock market, easy credit. Everybody can get credit extended out to them. You know, the whole idea of those installment plans, which will increase people's debt. This is, and that middle one, the easy credit, will cause a slowdown in consumer spend in the end. Speculation, the ones on the bookend, speculation and buying on margin. You know, these are those gambling, or those I guess gambling's the best word for it. Those gambling tactics almost, you know, that people see the stock market as a way to get rich quick, not really worry about the risk that's involved with investing that much money, because like we saw the other day with Esmeralda, you can always pay back the bank. And then there's a breakdown in world trade, and we'll see that this is partly in you know, due to those high tariff rates that we saw America institute with the Ford and Becomber tariff the early part of the decade, and then in 1930 with the Hawley-Smoot tariff. So those were like the long-term causes of the Great Depression. And while the stock market crash doesn't cause a Great Depression, it definitely accelerates, you know, its impact through all levels of American society. So how does this the Great Stock Market Crash of 1929 begin? It actually begins in September of 1929, when you see these investors start to get a little nervous and start to begin to sell stocks in order to get out of the market while prices are still high. As what happens here, as the volume of selling starts to increase, stock prices begin to fall in October. October 24th, 1929 is known as Black Thursday, when stock markets took a big plunge. Now they closed down the stock market early, and they thought they had saved it, and would be able to rebound. But the next Tuesday, October 29th, prices fell drastically as sellers continued to panic. By December of 1929, you see $40 billion in stock value had been lost. Some shares, were worth nothing, literally $0. And so while the crash does not cause the Great Depression, like I said earlier, it definitely accelerates the nation's economic downturn. So what is Hoover doing? Well, Hoover and business leaders attempt to calm Americans down. They try to assure them that the country's economy was fundamentally sound. In an act of good faith, J.P. Morgan and other bankers bought $20 million of U.S. Steel to try to restore confidence, to try to encourage people to put their money back in the stock market, continue to invest, but to no avail. This is something that is unprecedented as far as the scale goes, and we'll start to see here that when people are selling it and people are losing money on this on the stocks. This is going to cause, once again, businesses to fail, banks to fail, and we see this happen. We see runs on the banks. We see businesses go under. And between 1929 and 1933, 100,000 businesses are going to go under. Corporate profits fall from 10 billion to 1 billion. Over 6,000 banks are gonna fail. That means when people are making the runs on the banks and withdrawing their money and their savings, eventually they're not gonna have, because you remember there is no FDIC, there is no insurance on your savings or your checking account. Eventually the banks run out of money and they have to close their doors. They fail. And so, what are you going to do now when you have this huge economic catastrophe? Well, Hoover, he's part of that Republican old guard. He's part of that laissez-faire approach. He had championed what's called rugged individualism, where you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you succeed, in your own merits, just like he had done, and just like America had been built off of people, for instance, going out west and making it on their own, and this whole idea of direct relief, the government stepping in and offering assistance. Hoover's going to reject that. He doesn't think that this is what Americans want, and he urges instead that Americans need to turn to their community and turn to church resources. But this is all well and good, but by 1933, you see that 9 million savings accounts amounting to a total of $2.5 billion where it was lost. And these are families and individuals. By 1933, 13 million people are employed, which is going to account for 25% of the workforce. Thousands of families are going to lose their homes, their farms, and foreclosures. You see these tent cities and these shanty towns are going to be they're going to be actually dubbed Hoovervilles. Are going to spring up. And large numbers of people are going to roam the United States seeking work. People's health is going to start to suffer as a consequence of these hardships. Malnutrition is going to increase, as well as things like tuberculosis, typhoid fever, dysentery. A lot of people, turn to these soup kitchens, turn to these bread lines. But even so, being on such a huge scale, these local communities and these church resources, they couldn't keep up with the demand. And for instance, 95 people in New York City are going to die of starvation in 1932. And so, as this situation from 29 to 33 continues to worsen, people are going to continue to want Hoover to do something. And we'll look at the next video that he is going to take some steps, and he is going to take some action here. But Some people like to think that the steps that Hoover does take, it's a little too late, too little, too late. And in the next video, we'll look at, what Hoover's tactics and strategies were going into 1930, 31, and 32.